Coming up, one of the many things I'm looking forward to once the Tories have been voted out of office is a full inquiry into the Tory corruption in the award of lucrative government contracts to donors, cronies and even family members. The Labour Party have pledged to appoint a COVID corruption minister once in office, and even now the police are already investigating the PPE contract scandal linked to Baroness Mone and her husband Doug Barrowman. They've arrested one man and interviewed at least 5 suspects under caution. And so it begins. Rachel Reeves, almost certainly the next Chancellor of the Exchequer in a Labour government, made a speech to the Labour Party conference last October, and she had this to say.
We will go after those who profited from the carnival of waste during the pandemic. The costs to the taxpayer of COVID fraud is estimated at £7.2 billion, with every single one of those cheques signed by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor. And yet just 2% of all fraudulent COVID grants have been recovered. So I can announce today that we will appoint a COVID corruption commissioner, supported by a hit squad of investigators, equipped with the powers they need and the mandate to do whatever it takes to claw back the money that has ripped off the taxpayer, to take the fraudsters to court and to get back every penny of taxpayers' money that they can. We want that money back.
So just to reinforce the key points that Reeves was making there, partially drowned out by the noise from the audience. First, COVID fraud is estimated to be around £7.2 billion. Now, that's enough money to build 24 new state-of-the-art hospitals, or to raise the income tax threshold by £3,500 to 16 grand a year, or to knock off over a penny from the basic income tax rate. That's big money. Secondly, Sunak's government has failed to recover 98% of that money. And finally, a Labour government is committed to appointing a COVID corruption commissioner to prosecute the fraudsters and Tory cronies who stole public money, and to recover that money using whatever powers the commissioner may need. What Rachel Reeves didn't mention is that the £7.2 billion estimate of fraud is only part of the £10 billion that the Tory government under Boris Johnson themselves admitted was wasted on vast stockpiles of substandard, unusable protective gowns, masks, gloves and goggles. And even today, we're still paying millions of pounds in storage fees for that stockpile. And a significant portion of those fees are going to Tory donors. It's not even historic fraud. It's still happening right now. But thanks to the efforts of the Good Law Project, an independent pro-democracy campaign organisation led by Jo Mone, this issue is now coming under scrutiny, with the police commencing investigations into at least one company involved in the scandal. But before I go on, a big thank you to each of you that comments on the Truth to Power videos and who likes and shares them to their social media, or who subscribes to the channel. It's much appreciated. So, early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, the Good Law Project flagged up some truly bizarre contracts being awarded by the Tory government. Many of these contracts were for the unlikely sum of £108 million, which just so happens to have been the magic number, the maximum size of a contract that could be awarded by the Tories to their cronies and friends without the need for a competitive tendering process, openness and transparency and rigorous scrutiny. Funny that, isn't it? That's why we saw contracts for £108 million worth of PPE being awarded to a tiny pest control company and a recruitment agency, to name just 2. It was the Good Law Project that uncovered the existence of a murky VIP lane for friends and connections of Michael Gove, which offered a fast track to lucrative PPE contracts awarded by the Boris Johnson government. One of these connections was from Michael Gove to Michelle Mone, and from Michelle Mone to the company PPE Medpro. These contracts are now a subject of a National Crime Agency investigation, with news this week that the police had made their first arrest, a man of 46 from North London, on suspicion of conspiracy to commit fraud and attempting to pervert the course of justice. This man, who has since been released under investigation, is one of at least 3 business associates of Mone and her husband Doug Barrowman, who have previously been interviewed under caution as part of a long-running inquiry by the National Crime Agency. The couple are being investigated over allegations of conspiracy to defraud, fraud by false representation and bribery. The investigation kicked off about a year ago after PPE Medpro, headed up by Doug Barrowman, was awarded government contracts worth £202 million for the supply of face masks and medical gowns to the NHS.
The 2 contracts in total came to a value of £202 million. And Medpro made a return on its investment of about, realistically, about 30%.
So about £60 million or?
Yeah.
The contracts plural that is, so they could individually be kept under that £108 million ceiling, so no need to go to competitive tender, were awarded after Mone lobbied ministers, including the ubiquitous kingpin Michael Gove. Mone, that's Lady Mone to you, failed to declare any potential conflict of interest to the House of Lords where she sat, while both Mone and Barrowman denied any link to PPE Medpro for many months, until leaked HSBC documents revealed that £29 million of profits from the company were later transferred by Barrowman to an offshore trust of which Mone and her 3 adult children are beneficiaries. After that, in December last year, Mone was forced into this apology.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I wasn't trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, and I regret and I'm sorry for not saying straight out, yes, I am involved. My family have gone through hell with the media over, my career, and I didn't want another big hoo-ha in the press and my family to be involved in it.
About £75 million worth of assets linked to the couple have now been frozen by investigators under the Proceeds of Crime Act. It allows for money to be clawed back if either of them are prosecuted and convicted. The freeze prompted Mone to complain to the Sunday Times that she was being treated like Pablo Escobar, the late Colombian drug baron. Both Levelling Up Minister Michael Gove, Tufton Street's inside man in Sunak's cabinet, and Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary, have separately been interviewed by the National Crime Agency as witnesses. It really is happening. Oh, and also, in a separate move, the Department of Health and Social Care is suing PPE Medpro on the grounds that the gowns it supplied were unusable. But PPE Medpro are just one of many cases where companies referred through Gove's VIP lane supplied PPE at highly inflated prices that ended up unfit for purpose. During their investigations, the Good Law Project had to deal with legal threats whilst breaking through Gove and the government's wall of silence. It's quite ironic, given that Michael Gove heads up the government's responses to inquiries under the Freedom of Information Act, legislation enacted by the Blair government but totally trashed by Gove in his role with the opaque and secretive Tory administrations that have followed. But the Good Law Project persisted. And after smaller wins against the government, in 2022, the High Court agreed with them and ruled that the government's VIP lane was illegal. Since then, there have been unending freedom of information request battles with Gove and government departments, but the Good Law Project have uncovered cronyism on a grand scale. Lucrative contracts awarded to cronies and donors have been exposed, as has the fact that some of the money involved has flowed back to the Conservative Party in the form of donations. This is corruption on an industrial scale. Many of the beneficiary companies have now been wound up, which will make it all the more difficult to reclaim this ill-gotten money. And that's happened because Gove and his colleagues did nothing to try to recover this fraud before the perpetrators and their fixers, often Tory donors or cronies, funneled the money into offshore trusts or into real estate. Too many people say of politicians, they're all the same. or that Labour and the Tories are two parts of a uni-party. But I do think this is one area where there will be a significant change of tack following the election. With the Labour Party pledged to appoint a COVID corruption commissioner, I think this will be a game changer. Not just the fact that many of the billions that the government gave away to its friends and donors will be recovered, but that some of the guilty within government will find themselves being investigated and potentially prosecuted and could even end up in prison. The process has already begun. Unfortunately, that will be of no consolation to the 230,000 people who have so far lost their lives to COVID whilst the government engaged in cronyism and corruption. At least with Labour in office, there will be no government protection of the guilty from investigation and in prosecution. Bring it on.